Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic.
Sarah. What movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about 1933's The Private Life of Henry VIII. And Rena, can you give us the trigger warning?
Trigger warning. This movie contains depictions of decapitation, misogyny, bad table manners, maternal mortality, toxic men, binge eating, and men in tights.
Woo! And Rena, can you please give us the spoiler warning?
Sarah, can I ever? Spoiler warning! We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having absolutely nothing to do with this movie. Consider yourself warned.
Some of the sources we used in this episode include Henry VIII, The King and His Court by Alison Weir, and I used the internet.
I've been reading about the Tudors for decades. I've probably read at least 30 books or so.
Rena, can you tell us a little bit about our friend King Henry VIII?
Henry VIII of England, which was not yet Great Britain, was born on June 28th, 1491. He was the son of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York and was the second monarch in the Tudor dynasty, and is best known today for having married 6 times and for destroying the Catholic Church in England because the Pope wouldn't give him a divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, who he sought to replace as her childbearing years wound to a halt. He was the father of 3 English rulers, Edward VI, Mary I, and, most importantly, Elizabeth I. He is also notorious for beheading 2 of his 6 wives and numerous former friends, starting wars, destroying the monasteries, and getting really fat, sorry for the body shaming, he is a toxic male, and for his period acceptable obsession with getting a male heir. And Henry was never supposed to be king. That was supposed to be his older brother, Arthur, Prince of Wales, who died in adolescence. And when Henry marries Arthur's widow, Catherine of Aragon, Charles Laughton is playing our idea of Henry as an older man, but when he was younger, he was like the ideal of a Renaissance prince. He wrote a book that nobody reads anymore to refute Martin Luther. He was very athletic. He spoke multiple languages. He was considered handsome. He didn't always look like our image of him.
You must have a favorite wife of his, right?
My favorite wife is Anne of Cleves. One of the things I loved in this picture is that Charles Laughton and his wife, Elsa Lanchester, who plays Anne of Cleves, are so clearly having a blast acting together. She would later go on to play the Bride of Frankenstein. And she's actually very pretty, but she doesn't seem to have much ego as a performer because she's like willing to play the unattractive characters.
Casting wise, I didn't find her unappealing. I was like, that's supposed to be the unattractive one?
But of Cleves is my favorite because she was someone who made the best of it. Like, I guess what they don't go into here, part of her deal with Henry was she couldn't remarry or she would lose all of the swag that he gave her. But she stays in England where she's given all of the esteem that would go to if she were the king's sister, which is quite a great deal and always has been. She outlives Henry. She outlives all the other wives. It's because she makes the best of things and because she got the weirdest deal. She was also the one who was married to him for the shortest amount of time. Catherine of Aragon, who is not on screen here, was married to Henry longer than the other wives combined.
Ugh. These people are trashy AF. We have some corpse capers this week, I believe,
yes,
too.
We do. Philippa Gregory cites other sources, but she describes how after Henry dies and they stuff his enormous bloated corpse into a big old coffin, it was said that the corpse exploded or that the coffin cracked and leaked, while stopped at Sion Abbey overnight, and that the dogs licked some of the remains from the floor. Although this may have been a story meant to discredit Henry. There are people who are mad at Henry. And he had originally planned to have an enormous, elaborate tomb. However, I have seen where he's buried when I made my pilgrimage to Windsor Castle, where he's buried in St. George's Chapel under a plain black slab, and he's there with Jane Seymour, the wife who bore him a son, and also stuffed in there is Charles I, because they needed to get rid of the body after chopping off the head, but his tomb didn't remain undisturbed. The Victorians loved to open up vaults and take a look at what was inside. They dug up Lord Byron, and they loved creeping around under Westminster Abbey and seeing this casket is collapsing on top of this one and detailing it, but his casket is not in good shape when someone drew a picture of it in the 19th century. The corpse capers around his sixth wife, Catherine Parr, are actually much more interesting and quite a bit more macabre. I'll share those if we ever get to Firebrand, but the short of it is that her hundreds-year-old dead body is exposed for a while and people look at it. She gets moved around a lot, but she's now buried in a tomb with a very nice glissant. That's a sleeping sculpture of a dead person on top of a tomb.
What are we doing? People are weird.
Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about the 1933 British film The Private Life of Henry VIII, starring Charles Laughton, which is our first film from the 1930s. I wanted to say it was our first foreign film, but that is actually Race, which was funded, I believe, by Canada, Germany, and one other country that was not the US.
Yes. I believe it was France.
Despite it being a biopic about American track and field legend and national hero, Jesse Owens.
The Private Life of Henry VIII is, as you mentioned, a 1933 British film, directed and co-produced by Alexander Korda, and starring Charles Laughton, Robert Donat, Merle Oberon, and Elsa Lanchester. It was a major international success. It established Alexander Korda as a leading filmmaker. It made Charles Laughton a box office star. The budget was £93,000, and it made £750,000. It was a huge hit for the day.
Why are we doing a movie that is 90 years old when there are more recent biopics that people are actually interested in that will get our fledgling podcast some traction? First of all, it was important to me to think about the long game in planning our episodes and to cover the full length and breadth of filmmaking itself, as well as the full scope of history. If we were to focus purely on what people ask for, which is the highest grossing musical biopics of the past 20 years, I would get bored out of my mind. We have been making biopics for as long as we have been making movies. The history of the biopic is kind of a meta-history of film asking to be taken seriously as an art form.
Within 10 seconds of this starting, I was kind of even knowing the mission of our show and why we're doing this and knowing why we were doing a movie from 1933, I was just like, what the fuck are you doing to me, Rena? Also, I watched maybe the most garbage transfer of this film that ever existed on Roku Movies, but I want to be really clear. The artistic and commercial merits of this film, its importance cannot be overstated.
There is a decent quality print of this movie available on the streaming service formerly known as HBO Max, now just Max, where it is included in their selection from the Criterion Collection. And I thought you subscribed to that one.
I do subscribe to Max. There's a whole function on there where you just search for a movie and it tells you where to find it. And I don't know why it didn't come up on Max, but it did come up on the garbage transfer print network. I want to be clear. I love old new movies. I took a whole class on movies of the 1930s in college. I wrote papers on films of the 1930s for that class. And also I wrote my 8th grade report on the golden age of Hollywood because it was super cool. I also happen to love Charles Laughton. He made one of the best movies of all time, Night of the Hunter. And I love Merle Oberon. She is one of my favorite movie stars ever. She is in Wuthering Heights, the 1939 version with Laurence Olivier. And that is like a huge movie for me in my childhood and growing up that I just adored. Like, I do love an old movie. This is just, the transfer was hard going for me. So as I mentioned, £93,000. That's 5 times the average cost of a British feature film in the early 90s. The British film industry was not taken terribly seriously, and this movie was huge. Commercial success, artistically successful. It made Hollywood take British filmmakers and filmmaking seriously. I'm going to just kind of like walk you through the spider webs of how artistically critical this movie is. So Charles Laughton and Alexander Korda are critical in shaping auteur theory. These are people who changed the film industry and turned it into art. You know, for example, Charles Laughton, who I was trying to find a comparable person in the entertainment industry, and I really couldn't come up with someone who is today's version of that, because he directed film one time, but he also did a lot of stage directing, stage acting, film acting, television acting. Like, he worked constantly throughout his entire life.
He is a character actor, not handsome, who does leading man-size roles, which I guess is comparable to, say, Gene Hackman.
Yeah.
Or Steve Buscemi.
Yeah, he's like Gene Hackman or Steve Buscemi combined with Kenneth Branagh. Night of the Hunter is the only movie he directed. It was a commercial failure, but because of Night of the Hunter, we have the Coen brothers as they presently are. It's referenced in pretty much everything they've made. And without the Coen brothers, we don't have every celebrity crush I've had, but that's not important right now. He was like a seminal influence on a lot of people who are still making movies. Alexander Korda got a 16 film contract from United Artists as a result of this film. He produced a host of very important movies, including The Third Man.
Another note about Charles Laughton, we will be seeing him again in our New Year's Eve episode, which I am pleased to announce is Spartacus. He was also in one of the most lamentedly unfinished movies of all time, which is also a historical epic. There was going to be a black and white British film version of I, Claudius, and there's still footage from this.
Also worth mentioning is, you know, at the Academy Awards, it was a foreign movie to win an Oscar, and Charles Laughton for Best Actor, and also the first foreign Best Picture nominee.
Alas, he was, however, not the first foreign actor to win Best Actor. That is Emil Jannings, the Nazi, who made propaganda for Hitler. He appears as a character who gets blown up at the theater in Inglourious Bastards. And when the GIs showed up, Emil Jannings runs out with his Oscar saying, "Don't kill me, I have an Academy Award."
Such a bummer that worked.
Fuck this guy.
He's not in this movie, though. And
He's not in this movie. Why are we giving him space here?
And Charles Laughton seems like a completely magical person if you watch any of the behind-the-scenes footage of him directing the children in Night of the Hunter. So I guess let's talk about the movie. It follows the plot of the musical Six. I would say of all of the movies we've done, this is the one where I'm like, you know what happens in this movie. He gets married, kills her, gets married, gets divorced. The opening crawl of this is very strange. I felt like the opening crawl immediately put us in this like boys against girls kind of energy, because they have all the men on one title card and all the women actresses on another. And I was like, well, that's weird.
Interesting note on the woman's title card. The actress referred to as Lady Tree. That is not her first name. It is her title. She was married to Sir Herbert Beerbohm Tree. and was the mother of Bohemian It Girl, Iris Tree, who you see in La Dolce Vita. She's one of the people hanging out at one of the parties. Anyway.
So yeah, we open on that. We also find out right away this movie is not going to discuss Catherine of Aragon. I can see why they wouldn't include her. There's a long unhappy marriage. We've got plenty of entertainment based around that.
So I wouldn't say unhappy. He appears to have been in love with her at the time that they were married. She had at least 6 pregnancies over 9 years that we know of, but that isn't counting possible early miscarriages. So he really wore her out trying to get an heir, but all he got was Mary Tudor. But Catherine of Aragon, she won the Battle of Flodden. She beat Scotland at a battle where Henry's brother-in-law, James of Scotland, was killed. And Henry VIII has he may have descendants from times where he bonked a chambermaid. We know that he had children with Anne Boleyn's sister, Mary Boleyn, and there's a list of people where there's a little bit of evidence around it. His bastard son with Bessie Blount, Henry, Duke of Richmond, died at about the age of 17. So for all of his fuss over getting a son, the present British royal family descends from his sister Margaret's children by James of Scotland, the man killed in battle where Catherine of Aragon was managing things while Henry was out of the country.
These people are trashy.
But much fun. And I hate reality TV, but I love this stuff because of how they're dressed. And because it's a long time ago and it has flowery language and castles.
So we open on all of these ladies in waiting prepping Henry's bedchamber and speculating about what he looks like in his sleep and sweating him really hard. And they're all really dressed up to clean his room. I couldn't help but notice. And also, something that I was told early on in my working life was to find out what happened to the person who had the job before you if you want to understand what the company's like. And Anne Boleyn is preparing to have her head cut off. I don't get the I can change him kind of energy around Henry VIII because your job isn't very secure.
I think you're underrating the idea that power is sexy. And he had been married for a very long time before he took up with Anne Boleyn. He'd also had a ton of mistresses. But I guess this goes to a question I had where I was questioning the premise of the film Descendants, which is, I have not seen it, but it's a Disney picture about the children of Disney villains attending a high school. And my question was, how could these people have children? They're morally repugnant. And the person I was talking with pointed out, well, yes, but Jafar, evil witches, all these people are also shown as being one of the most powerful people in their country, and power is sexy. And I was like, okay. And in terms of their being well-dressed, they are ladies of the court. Their daddies all have titles, and they don't have to do any actual chores. They're just embroidering. Their job is to hang out with people who have bigger, fancier titles than them and embroider. They're not servants. And one thing here, in terms of how different eras modify things, I did not clock cod pieces in this film.
I didn't either.
I saw the doublet and hose, and I think British actors who had that theater training knew how to get away with doublet and hose. Even more recently, Burton could do it. It's hard. It is hard to carry that off.
This is just a note I have across the board for this movie. I understand what they were trying to do. It was just weird because they're all kind of giddy about how fun it is that Anne Boleyn's going to get her head cut off and that Jane Seymour is going to take her place that evening. I think they were poking a little bit of fun at the historic royal family and how ridiculous they were. and maybe poking fun a little bit at society, because we also see people going to the beheading and being like, I can't see, move your hat. And everyone's really kind of like super psyched to bear witness.
People did go to public executions in Britain for centuries. It was a form of entertainment.
You didn't have phones. You didn't have your Candy Crush. I get it. But it's really kind of wild to see like how they're not even pretending to be like solemn about it. It's fascinating.
Well, this is a movie, and there's that one couple who we see again at a subsequent beheading where she's like, "You better get me a new dress for the next beheading." I will say, like, Anne Boleyn was pregnant like 4 times, and only Elizabeth lived. And one of the things she was accused of was adultery with her brother. She was under a lot of stress if she got bitchy toward people. Anyway, the key here. The title is The Private Life of Henry VIII, not The Six Wives of Henry VIII. It tells you right away that this is going to be about a segment of his life, which is useful, because my thought the first time that I saw this was that the wife count is really more like 3 2/2. But actually, on further reflection, Anne Boleyn, played by Merle Oberon, has more screen time than Jane Seymour, which makes sense because Jane Seymour, as they show her here, is dumb and boring, and it's sort of like she's the wife who, after Anne's fire, is like sweet and calm and super quiet and kind of mousy, and more importantly bears a living son. She actually died of complications about 2 weeks after the birth.
Ugh, it's a long time,
especially with medicine being what it was then.
That's a long time to linger at death's door. That sucks.
But she is the wife that he chose to be buried next to. And, oh shoot, this was what I left out for Corpse Capers. He had this very elaborate tomb planned, and pieces of it were built that were subsequently sold off. There was a big black marble sarcophagus that he intended for himself. He did not get buried with it, but Britain eventually made use of it. If you go to St. Paul's Cathedral, that is what Admiral Horatio Nelson is currently residing in. So they made use of it, 250 years later, for a man who actually beat the French in a big battle.
Corpse Capers, man. I love that Anne is like, it's a pity to lose a head like this. And everyone's kind of jolly. It's like the opening of the lottery, actually. Everyone's like, hey, fun, execution. And she gets her head cut off. That is a wrap on Merle Oberon, who I did think made a really great impression in this movie.
She wanted to die well. She's trying to show grace under pressure, and there's this whole scene where they've brought an executioner over from France to chop her head off with a sword because it'll be a cleaner, faster cut. And it's Henry's last gesture of love toward her that he gets her a fancy French executioner. No hatchet for Anne Boleyn. She did say that thing about, but I have such a little neck. Or she's like reported to, and I love like that they get her in the necklace with the bee with the 3 things hanging down. She has like so much presence, and she's gorgeous. And I like the actress. They're wearing 1930s makeup. There's no effort made at authenticity on that, and that is how it is in a lot of these earlier things. I feel like it's a relatively recent thing where directors will say no. We can't have women in the 17th century wearing blue eyeshadow. She's memorable for the time that she's there. And then Jane Seymour is tiresome. And we first meet Henry when this like bevy of squawking ladies is talking about him, and he just walks in, and Catherine Howard has to handle this. And I want to note, at this point, Catherine Howard was not at court. She was 13. She doesn't show up until Anne of Cleves arrives, which is later because Henry did like stay unmarried for a while for him after Jane Seymour died. And they show her here as like a sophisticated adult woman. She was born in 1523 or 1524 and died in 1542. So she was a teenager. So we have another. She was only 16. Only 16. So this is completely off, and I think it's because they need to have a through line on a woman. She was accused of adultery with this guy Culpeper, but she hadn't met him yet at the time they're showing them together. And I don't know what the necessity is for this.
I think it's to pad out the runtime to make it a feature-length film.
But there's so many other things that are more interesting that actually happened that they could have used instead. I think you found something that it was supposed to be about the Anne of Cleves marriage.
Yes.
Which would have been a really good comedy, because that's one of the rare times where like all parties are on screen are crackling. Like Laughton has to carry this whole picture because there's an insipid love story that they're wasting time on. Yes. Between Catherine Howard and Thomas Culpeper.
I would also speculate that it was there to satisfy a certain audience that would be like, I don't want to look at Charles Laughton, to get the people who need the romance in there.
And there's way more interesting stuff that actually happened. But yeah, Laughton is magnetic to watch. He commits hard, Merle Oberon commits hard, Elsa Lanchester commits hard. In order to really get my head into the older acting style, I had meant to watch a bunch of films from the era over the weekend, but instead I binge-watched the first season of Euphoria and the first 3 episodes of Wolf Hall. Still, there is acting in this that holds up. It's always a thing to try to judge these films by their time, but it's a magnetic performance.
Oh, it is. It is. And he was ahead of his time in terms of the way he used his face with a lot of subtlety. It explains why his career was so long, too, is that he was kind of at the forefront of a changed style of acting. And I struggled to give a rat's ass about the Culpeper plotline. I also would say that for a movie that calls itself The Private Life of Henry VIII, there's not a whole lot of interior, I didn't feel like there was much private life happening.
It's all in Laughton's face, any interiority. The dialogue is not that remarkable. It's his delivery. It's the way that he can make 4 words that out of anyone else's mouth are just stuff you say, sound like Oscar Wilde until you think about it. So, yeah, in this scene in the bed chamber, there's the old woman referred to as Nurse who wants to plant a fertility charm under the pillow, and the young ladies have to pick out all of the A's for Anne Boleyn out of the monograms on the bedroom accoutrements and replace them with J's for Jane Seymour. Jane Seymour is an airhead, and I'm glad she gets very little screen time. She dies, and we see Henry being thrilled with the new baby.
Yeah. And that was a tiny ass baby they got there.
Uh-huh.
I was like, oh my God, that baby, someone gave birth to that baby just off camera and they grabbed it and put it in this movie.
Did they have child labor laws about needing to get twins or triplets to play babies then?
Oh my God, no. No, there were no child film protections until 2 years ago in terms of protecting children from predators and all sorts of nonsense on set, as well as from their own parents stealing their money. That's all relatively new, and it's a huge bummer. Yeah, so he finds out it's a boy, so the baby's alive, the queen's dead. He's kind of that's okay. He reaches the point where he's like, should I marry again? And everyone's like, sure. He marries Anne of Cleves. Henry VIII has always been portrayed as a pretty repulsive person. Mm-hmm. And I was like, he's a buffoon. It's hard to take him seriously as a human, because he's eating messily and he's got all of his appetites and he's just a goof. It's difficult to care about him.
That scene of him complaining about manners while he's eating the chicken and throwing the chicken legs over his shoulder, that was burned into the minds of generations who saw this film. And it's It's fun to watch. Like, you can't not look at him, and whenever he's not on screen, the movie kind of fizzles out. I think he gives the character like multiple dimensions and some humanity
Oh yeah.
underneath what we see as the buffoonery. There's also this one part where he cracks a joke and everyone starts laughing because he's the king. And then you see this wave of laughter rolling down to the kitchens where everyone's laughing and they don't even know what they're laughing at. And it's just because he's the king. He has that thing with Catherine where he's saying, like, can you love me as a man? And she says, I'm letting you in because you're the king. And it's like every villain wants to be loved. Even like John Dillinger thought he was a very put upon individual. I think I was able to get over that 90-year hurdle of cultural differences to appreciate his performance. And my issues are with the script and with the formulas of storytelling that make them waste time on things that aren't interesting. So Anne of Cleves, they come up with like, oh, that she's in love with this. None of this ever happened. And the copy they get of the Holbein portrait of her is not good. And if you look at that portrait, she is beautiful. Apparently, it's unknown. Maybe, every woman has a good day every now and then. The German fashions were unflattering. Young English ladies of a certain class were expected to speak multiple languages and play musical instruments and like sing and to have these accomplishments that in Germany, it was like, no, you're a princess. You're not supposed to do any of that. That's for like low-class women. Moreover, like, look at her, look at him.
Yeah.
And was she like not his type? But at that point, he's obese. He had injured his leg in a jousting accident years earlier. He had an abscess on the leg that periodically reopened and oozed pus or oozed fluid and stank. He'd lost most of his hair, and when she arrived, he did a thing that she wouldn't have known about, where basically it's this thing from the troubadour tales where the handsome prince shows up in disguise and as like a humble singer or something, and his lady love is supposed to immediately know it's him. Anne doesn't know about this. She's like, who's this fat man busting into my rooms? No good reason for either of them to be into each other, but they come up with this conceit here that she's trying to look ugly. She's trying to be as off-putting as possible and to like hold her face in an ugly way so that he will get out of the marriage.
I really liked when Elsa Lanchester entered the movie because at this point, and once again, it's the highest compliment I pay to any piece of entertainment, I started to feel very unsafe. Like another 1933 movie, Freaks, was about to enter the conversation. I was like, is someone going to be turned into a chicken / like half human, half chicken woman in a minute? What is happening here? Because like the dynamic between them was so alive. Also, like what she brought to the table felt weird and wild, and I really liked it.
You see pictures of her, she was gorgeous, but I love an actress who doesn't feel the need to be beautiful.
Yeah.
Like she was the bride of Frankenstein.
She's a vanity-free performer who also did happen to be very beautiful. Also, I'm pretty sure that Jamie Lee Curtis's performance in Trading Places is entirely inspired by this. Her Swedish Germanic accent that she was doing, like the scene where in Trading Places where they're on the train. I did love her entrance into the film, and she livened up the proceedings.
So IRL, they were married for about 6 months. The marriage was unconsummated. Henry told a doctor that he'd fingered her, but it didn't go anywhere. And there was this fun story where her ladies in waiting were asking her, well, what happens? And she said, oh, he lays down and bids me good night. Is anything further supposed to happen? So we don't know if she was like playing dumb and knew exactly what was supposed to happen. And one of the ladies around her said, well, if this keeps up, it shall be long ere we get a little Duke of York. And that line is still killer going on 500 years later.
She manages to escape the marriage. She's the only one who I'm like, oh, you're smart.
Yeah, that's why she's my favorite. Props to her, because she didn't want to be sent back to Germany in disgrace. I mean, this is all made up with this guy that she's shown, but I don't know why they need to have these boring fake romances. And this is something that films still do, and it's always dumb. But she's a delight to watch on screen, where they play cards, and it's like, yeah, of course he thinks he's the best card player in England, because people are afraid to beat him. It's the same reason he thinks his jokes are the funniest. Nothing around him encourages self-reflection.
When we move towards his fifth marriage, this is to the scheming Catherine Howard.
There was not a less compelling way they could have told this story, because she was so young. There's like stories about, was she molested by her music teacher? Was she 11? Was she 13? She's cousin of Anne Boleyn. Powerful families would place their daughters in Henry's proximity to get ahead at court. I don't think this actress is especially good. If Laughton, Lanchester, and Oberon are not the ones reading the lines, you realize it's all their delivery.
Robert Donat plays Culpeper, and he's a very good actor, and this was really his big break too, but the character is so uncompelling. Like, these are just like Blandy McBlanderson, like faux Romeo and Juliet, people who are carrying on an affair behind Henry's back, and then he finds out, and then he's like, well, I gotta execute her.
The woman that they show being threatened with the rack is this like lady in waiting who we've seen but not heard from much. This is Jane Lady Rochford, who is the widow of George Boleyn, Anne Boleyn's brother, who was executed days before her, who she was accused of committing adultery with. Lady Rochford is a survivor. She's still around the court. She still has a position. And yeah, she dies too. I mean, the real way to be a survivor is get the hell away from court. But if you must hang on, she had a decent run of it. It's kind of amazing that it took another wife execution to move her off the chessboard.
I mean, yeah.
And she's also had a biography written recently. Like, half the people in this film have multiple bios of them. We're just fascinated with the Tudors.
I mean, they're mad trashy.
Oh, yeah.
I can see why people went to the executions for entertainment. It's like the end of like part of your reality show.
Yeah.
He's starting to like look really ragged at this point in the movie.
There are various like medical things cited. He didn't have syphilis. That's one of the things that has been cited a long time ago. But yeah, his weight gain and his aging was incredibly rapid in the final few years. It is sort of hard to figure out how much time is passing. And they do show, like, they'll show the year sometimes, but it's also that like Henry is rapidly decaying while no one else seems to age that much.
Yeah, he's looking ragged, and no one else is aged a day in this movie.
Well, right, and there's this one part where I loved this, where Catherine Howard says to him, oh, well, you were a great wrestler in your day, and he insists on wrestling a man, and he wins. And Laughton really throws himself into this. You also see his exhaustion. You see him limping. He's doing all these things as an actor that we think nobody thought much about until the method.
Like, for the last fourth of this movie, I'm like, stop making him do this. He's gonna die. Laughton sounds out of breath and in agony. It's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
How well he does at that.
You get that he's in pain from something.
I'm perfectly happy to have the implication of a leg filled with pus rather than seeing it.
Final seasons of the Tudors, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers was like, nope, not putting on the fat suit. So when they got to the Catherine Howard scenes, it's like, he still looks hot, but they're complaining about, oh, his leg hurts. Oh, it smells. And it's like, what?
I gotta watch this. Now I want to watch it. And then he decides to get married again, even though he is bummed out that he had to execute another wife.
In terms of him waiting for his wives to be executed, so also in real life, he waited until like a couple weeks after Anne Boleyn was dead to marry Jane Seymour. But they show him like waiting for the signal that she was dead, and he's tense. And then when Catherine Howard dies, he's like despondent, and you see like an enormous grown man cry. The scene where the counselors tell him what's going on, you can see that he's heartbroken, and that whatever life he had left in him was about doting on this girl who is uncompellingly played by an actress who like doesn't get like the child bride that he was giddy over because it was like recapturing his lost youth and he was fooling himself.
He's at the end of it, you know, in the final scene, she steps out of the room and he says, 6 wives and the best of them's the worst. And he looks right in the camera and does that.
Well, he breaks the fourth wall a lot. And I think that that's one of the things that keeps us from hating him. Before this, Anne of Cleves shows up to talk to him, and since she's like, hey, you need someone to look after you, and she points out like Catherine Parr playing with little Elizabeth and little Edward. But anyway, another thing they do that is sort of annoying is they have people say things that we're meant to laugh because, oh, haha, they were wrong, where he does this whole thing about Elizabeth, she'll never run anything, she can't run a kitchen, or where Culpeper is like, I'm going to run away to America, and I'm like, what the fuck, there's nothing in North America yet, and someone points that out to him.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask another dumb question.
Mm-hmm.
What's the deal with weddings? Like, why was it okay for him to marry so many commoners? And then was it just because Wallis Simpson was divorced?
Okay, so the woman that he was marrying were not commoners. Well, Catherine of Aragon was a foreign princess. Anne of Cleves was a foreign princess. But the woman that he was marrying were all daughters of the nobility. It wasn't something that never happened, that a king looked inwards and married a married a woman from the peerage. The thing is that they were supposed to be virgins and not divorced. Well, no, Catherine Parr was a widow.
Yeah,
she had multiple marriages where she was basically nursing an old man. And this is something that it only ran for one season, but Becoming Elizabeth showed Catherine Parr being a great stepmother, but she marries Jane Seymour's brother, and then dies in childbirth. Jane Seymour's brother was a dog who hit on Elizabeth while married to her stepmother, and it has a good performance by Bella Ramsey as Lady Jane Grey.
Fuck, I love them.
I don't know if you know Romola Garai. Romola Garai is the best portrayal I've seen of like humanizing Mary Tudor. They call her Bloody Mary, but Elizabeth killed a lot of Catholics.
We end there and he's kind of happy, I guess, sort of.
Not really. He dies in 1547. He's in miserable health. It appears that stuffing his face is the last form of pleasure left to him.
Yeah.
And that's our movie.
And Rena, did you have any choice dialogue?
I don't think there are any lines here that I would independently put in Bartlett's familiar quotations, but I did like, manners are dead. Don't you understand the king's English? I said money. And finally, you're the nicest girl I ever married.
I did like, and again, it's all in his delivery. He's about to go into the bedroom with Anne of Cleves, and he just says, the things I've done for England, before he was. And again, it's all the delivery. I laughed at that because he just nailed that line, and I wrote it down. But I'm not going to stitch it on a sampler anytime soon.
Sarah, can you please give our listeners a quick refresher about how we score movies?
I'd love to do that. We rate movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important to most films, but specially tailored to specific issues particular to biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for our past episodes.
I would also highly recommend listening to our special introductory episode, Introduction, Who Are We and What Are We Doing?, where we give a rundown of the methodology, why it matters to us, and some of the inspirations behind this podcast.
Okay, and with that out of the way, let's score this thing. Okay. Outward appearances, makeup and hair, 7.
I also gave it a 7. I think that for the time period, the rapid aging and padding they did on Charles Laughton was quite good, but there was stuff that looked glaringly 1930s.
Yes. Acting and casting. Do they capture the spirit of the people they're playing? And beyond that, is the acting good? I gave this a 6.
I gave it a 7 because there are 3 very magnetic performances in this. There are a lot of people in bit roles who are fully committed.
Passage of time, I gave it a 4.
I gave it a 3.5.
Costuming, 6.
I gave it an 8. It's hard to tell because it's in black and white, but it looked quite sumptuous. And
quality of the script, I gave it a 4.
I gave it a 5.
Accuracy, 3.
I gave it a 2.5. When I looked at is it more accurate than The Conqueror? Are its inaccuracies less irksome than Tennessee Johnson? But I can't quite give it a 3. I guess storytelling, I gave it a 5.
Yeah, I gave it a 5. Production value, I gave it an 8.
Me too. The furniture looks incredible. The carving looks incredible. There's even one point where I think they've put HJ on some bed hangings, but you see the fade shadow of an A behind the J. For production direction decision making, I gave it an 8. I
gave it a 9 for production direction decision making. And for do we care, I gave it a 5. I don't really care about these people.
I gave it a 7 because didn't care about Catherine Howard and Thomas Culpepper, but I've been reading these stories since I was 8. I'm just fascinated, and I thought one of the aspects of Laughton's performance is there's a pathos and a ridiculousness to this man who's always had everyone say yes to him. And Laughton is absolutely embodying the idea that you are your character's lawyer.
Yeah, and this is as likable as Henry V, this is as likable as Henry VIII has ever been.
I love the art and I love the cultural heritage that these people left. We don't have anything much like that here. This country is too young for me.
I am using my buy this week to give this a plus up. I want to honor its importance, and I want to honor Charles Laughton's work and the fact that this did usher in British filmmaking being taken seriously internationally, and also, was a seminal point where we were introduced to a number of really fantastic artists. And for that, I am very grateful.
Yeah, I used the buy to add a +1 for the same reason, because there are films that we have given 6s or 5s to that this is, I'll say it, better than because it's important. That makes it sound like it's an eat your vegetables, and it wasn't, because of the things that it's doing for, if not the first time, then very early in these things being done that we take for granted now. It needs a higher score than other things that were that got lower scores for mediocrity. So the buy brings me to 7.1.
My vibe brings me to 6.7.
Okay, so sorry, private life of Henry VIII, you did not earn a second opinion. And that's actually fine with me.
That's fine with me too. I don't want to read the bad reviews of this.
I can bet they'll all judge it for this is old, this is stagey, and they'll probably be by people who have no appreciation for film history.
Is there anything that you would recommend on top of this that people should take in?
If you demand flashy modern storytelling with modern acting styles and indeed great performances, and that your movies be in color, Elizabeth starring Cate Blanchett is a modern classic. If you're looking for something middlebrow to watch while you're working around the kitchen, guilty pleasure. I love me some of those Starz series that are based on Philippa Gregory. Alison Weir writes like a book every year, and she's written biographies or novels about like every Tudor or every Plantagenet. I'd also say I think the best out of this, like those particular Starz series, is Becoming Elizabeth. What I like about those series is they get into things that are like less featured, because actually we will see Henry VIII's again. We will see Richard Burton. We will probably get to Firebrand, which is Jude Law. We're going to see a lot of him, but like the White Princess is the story of his parents, and the White Queen is about his grandparents, and those aren't stories people tell often. Anything before 1800, I'm in my element.
I would say, please watch Night of the Hunter, watch everything the Coen brothers make, watch The Third Man, and thank this movie for existing for all of those things.
Had this movie not been a massive success, all movies could still look like the pathetic, one-dimensional love story between Catherine Howard and Thomas Culpepper.
Yeah, let's be grateful for the Brits coming in and making their movies.
You know who I'm surprised wasn't in this? John Gielgud.
There was a place for him in here.
Oh yeah,
He could have been that baby.
He would have been probably in his 20s, but I could see him being a young courtier in this or something. But yeah, welcome to the show, Charles Laughton. Is there anyone else in this who we're going to see again?
We might see Robert Donat again, and also maybe Merle Oberon.
Mm-hmm. Tangential to Corpse Capers, we will see the man who eventually got what was supposed to be Henry's big black marble casket. If we get to That Hamilton Woman, the story of Horatio Nelson.
Oh, so if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is @Biopic a Podcast Story. So do check us out there, and we'll link to that in our show notes as well. Please also check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see the official ratings for all of the movies that we've done so far. And if you would like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com.
Tune in next week when we'll be talking about Maria, starring Angelina Jolie as Maria Callas, with our second ever guest star, author Sophia Lambton, who wrote the new Callas biography.
We are very excited to have Sophia on the show. She's an actual expert on this. She became a professional classical music critic at the age of 17, and she began writing for Musical Opinion, Britain's oldest music magazine. Since then, she has contributed to The Guardian, Bachtrack, Music OMH, Broadway World, BBC Music Magazine, and Opera Wire, and conducted operatic research around the world for her book, The Callas Imprint, A Centennial Biography, which is available on Amazon, and we will link to it in the show notes. And this richly detailed account of Maria Callas's life was published to coincide with her 100th birthday in December of 2023. It's currently a finalist on the 2024 ARSC Awards for Best Historical Research in Recorded Classical Music. She also has a Substack called Crepuscular Musings, providing vivid explorations of TV and cinema together with reviews of operas, concerts, and recitals at sophialambton.substack.com. She also has completed her first literary saga, The Crooked Little Pieces, and she's working on her second. She lives in London. She can be reached through Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Pinterest at The Crepuscular Press. We're really excited to have her on the show and to talk about this movie and what's real and what's not in it, and also to check out the movie itself.
Until there's nothing like having a real expert give us the rundown on things. My primary knowledge of Maria Callas comes from seeing Zoe Caldwell in Masterclass on Broadway. It was my birthday present in high school one year.
My knowledge of her is based essentially on the love triangle between her and Jackie Kennedy and Aristotle Onassis. So I am like steeped in the trash lore of this and know nothing about her life.
Well, have a fantastic week, everyone, and we will see you again for our episode on Maria.
Yay!